Just want to welcome you here again today. Just give him a deep praise. To God be the glory. Could you just glorify him this afternoon? To God be the glory. Great things he has done. Great things he has done. I want to welcome you here today. Tash will be bringing the message. I heard her say last night, I think this is her last message in relation to her practicum, but not her last message here. You will see more and hear more of her here in Southwood. I want to take this time to extend an invitation to all those who would have the opportunity to view this message on social media. You can just punch in Southwood Church of God on YouTube, or you can, I tried it too, you can punch in Pastor Alfred Rapperson, one or the other, it will come up. I encourage you to listen to the New Year's service. I was at a car dealer here last week sometime, and apparently they have their morning booster talk, and they're using part of that message with my permission to encourage their salespeople, their salespeople. So things are happening. People are watching. So keep praying for it. I want to give you our email address. It's Southwood Church of God Calgary @gmail.com. You can have prayer requests by using that. You can send us a note. You can even do a donation through that if you feel like it. You'd like to support once in a while what's going on here. So keep that in mind, and as Tash get ready to come to share with you, keep her in prayer.
Today is Sunday, April the 3rd, 2022. The title of my sermon today is, There is a Plan and a Purpose, okay? Before we get into it, I want to just do a brief recap on the last sermon that I gave to you guys, if you remember. So Pastor always says this is an adult Bible class, okay? So I'm giving you permission to be interactive today with me. So do you guys remember what we talked about at the last sermon that I gave? Do you remember, anybody? We talked about excuses. Yeah? What does God think about our excuses? Yes, right on. And we spoke about a few main characters. We talked about Moses. We talked about Moses and the excuse that he gave. And do you guys remember what that excuse was? Okay, so Moses had a lack of confidence. God had commanded him to go before Pharaoh and speak, okay? And Moses said, I can't do that. I'm not eloquent enough to do that. Don't send me there, find somebody else to speak. We talked about Gideon. His excuse, God had called him to defend the Israelites against the enemy, the Midianites, and Gideon was like, I can't do that. My clan is too small. I can't go and defend. We talked about Saul. Do you guys remember what Saul did from the Message Bible? Do you remember? He went and hid. That was his excuse, right? He went and hid. Where did he go hide? In some baggage. Solomon, he had said that he was too young. But the contrast here, Solomon was very young. Does anybody know how old Solomon was when he was anointed king?
11.
I had 12, but could be in that range, yeah. But Solomon did not have an excuse. Solomon asked for wisdom to lead the people when he became king. Isaiah, his reply to God, he knew that he was a sinner, and he humbly acknowledged that and displayed humility when God called him. Both Solomon and Isaiah recognized the magnitude of the task. They didn't give an excuse. Instead, they prayed for wisdom, okay? Then we went to the New Testament in Matthew, and in 18, the fella, he followed the Lord, and then there was another fella that said, I can't go, I have to take care of my father. The father was sick. So you have some going, some not wanting to go. And I also mentioned that if you do not turn your focus from yourself, you will all have all kinds of excuses. If you're not going after the will of the Lord, you will find yourself going after your will, and you will always have an excuse. Oh, I'm too tired. I gotta mop the floor. I gotta, do other things besides spending that time with the Lord, right? We also looked at those that didn't give an excuse. You have Simon Peter, you have Andrew and Levi in Matthew and in Luke. They dropped everything and they followed the Lord. He said, come follow me. They dropped everything, they followed the Lord. And we ended off on Jeremiah. So Jeremiah was a prophet. He was called by God, right? When was the calling placed on Jeremiah's life? Does anybody remember? In verse 5, before he was born. The calling was placed on his life before he was born. Jeremiah gave God the excuse that he was too young, but God knew something that Jeremiah didn't know, and God's reply to Jeremiah in verse 7 and 8. So I'm looking at Jeremiah 1. His reply in 7 says, but the Lord said to me, do not say, I am young, for you shall go to all to whom I send you, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of their faces, for I am with you, and I will deliver you, says the Lord. So that's God's reply to Jeremiah. Only God that is sovereign, there's only a God that is sovereign, can say these things. Not only can he say and speak into your life, but he follows through with his word. History confirms that regardless of these excuses, a lack of confidence, you might say, what we think our disabilities are, what they thought their disability was, they accomplished great feats through the help of the Lord. Moses, we talked about his excuse. Moses led the Israelites through the Red Sea as they fled from Pharaoh, from the Egyptians, in hot pursuit. So regardless of your excuse or what you think your inability is, God is going to use this ordinary person to prove a point, to show victory. Moses was also involved in the 10 Commandments, and God gave him endurance to weather the storms of the wilderness for 40 years. Not just the environment, but the people that he had to lead. They were, they believed one day and they didn't believe the next day. It's like a thorn in his side. He was like up and down with these people. Gideon, the one that didn't have a great army, he served as the 5th major judge in Israel. He united the Israelites against their common enemies, and by God's power defeated them. It's all about God. Both Moses and Gideon, so these two men that we just mentioned, their names are mentioned as heroes in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews. If you go to Hebrews, it's called the Hall of Faith, and these men are mentioned there as heroes in the Old Testament. Saul, who went and hid, was anointed the first king of Israel. He defeated many of the enemies of his country, and he brought freedom to the Israelites. Solomon was the first king, most famous for what? Wisdom. He also built the temple In 1 Kings, he says, "And behold, I propose to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spoke to my father David." Now moving into the New Testament, Peter, after being invited by Jesus to come, Peter got out of a boat and for a brief moment walked on water. He correctly identified Jesus as the Messiah, and through his own, not through his own knowledge, but through the enlightenment of the Holy Spirit, he correctly identified Jesus as the Messiah. Peter boldly proclaimed the gospel in Jerusalem, unafraid of arrest and persecution, and according to church tradition, Peter taught alongside Paul the Apostle in Rome and founded Christianity in that city. Does what they did then affect us now? You know, like it transcends through time what these great men were doing. These ordinary men that God used to bring to bring about extraordinary achievements. They said yes to the Lord, and the rest is history. Okay, so can we agree that excuses are irrelevant? They're a waste of words. Can we agree that God has planned our destiny before we were born? Can we agree on that, would you say? So now in saying that, I want to look at 1 Samuel. The bulk of my sermon today will be from 1 Samuel. And I want to zoom in on a prophet who before he was born was destined for greatness, okay? The main characters for my sermon is going to be Elkanah is Samuel's dad, Hannah is Samuel's mom, Eli is the priest, and he has two sons named Phinehas and Hophni, okay? But before I get into the story, I need to give you some background information of what's going on at that time. Okay. The book of Samuel, 1 Samuel, begins with Israel at one of the lowest points in her history. During the conquest of Canaan, the tribes of Israel had not fully carried out God's command to drive out the Canaanites, and spiritual failures resulted. Thus, God brought discipline through foreign nations. A tragic cycle began in which Israel would briefly return to God under the leadership of a divinely appointed judge, deliverer, only to lapse again into disobedience. At the end of 1 Samuel, Israel's priest Eli was weak and his family corrupt. Disrespect for God and his ways permeated the culture. At this point in time, Israel constituted a group of 12 tribes closely held together by worship, gathered around a central sanctuary, the tabernacle where Yahweh was to dwell among them. They had no central leader and frequently fell prey to other nations because of their failure to trust and obey their God. But tremendous change politically, socially, and religiously were about to take place. Okay? The corruption, let me explain. The corruption of Eli's family was specifically with the sons, Hophni and Phinehas. According to God's law, the priests were given a specified portion of the sacrificial offering, okay? But Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, took unlawful portions for themselves before even giving God his portion, okay? They treated his sacrifice with contempt. Do we know what contempt means? It's where you have disregard, disrespect. You put somebody, the feeling of a person or thing is beneath consideration. This is what they did. And they brought those people, the worst of it, these boys caused the Lord's people to sin. Thus, the nation was in need of some godly leadership. Okay? So now we got some background. I'd like to relay my message given from God's perspective. I know this is a big feat, and Lord, indulge me, you guys as well. What I think, this is my perspective of what I think God's perspective is, okay? I'm not speaking for him. So, as I speak, please keep in mind that you're hearing God. You're not hearing me. This is God's story, okay? Even close your eyes if you need to and imagine. Okay, here we go. God speaking. It was around 722 BC. My word was rare in this time. Israel had no central leader and frequently fell prey to other nations because of their failure to trust and obey me. Israel was at one of the lowest points in her history. Sin was on the rise. There was no judges to rule or kings to reign on my behalf. Israel's priest Eli was weak physically and spiritually. I expected him to stand for righteousness, but unfortunately, he put the needs of his family first and allowed them to desecrate my temple. The time had come to find his successor. I require a faithful religious leader who will act on my behalf and bring my word back to my people. Without my presence in the land, the sins of the people were becoming increasingly atrocious. I mean, really bad sins. I needed to make a move. Within the land of the unfaithful, there is always a remnant that stays faithful to me. My thoughts go to Hannah, my precious daughter. I remember her desperate cries. She prayed to have a baby, and her heart was broken over it. In her prayer, she promised that if I gave her a son, she would give him right back to me to worship in the temple, located in Shiloh, for all the days of his life. Hannah kept her promise, and Samuel, her son, ministered to me and before Eli, the priest. Whether he knew it or not, Samuel was being groomed for my service, and he assisted Eli in his daily rounds. It was about the middle of the night on this particular night. The only light that remained was the 7 candlesticks still flickering on the lampstand in the temple. I can smell a hint of sweet fragrance from the altar of incense lingering from the previous day. Eli, the high priest, is sound asleep. He is tired, old, and almost blind. Samuel, too, was resting in the house of the Lord. Right beside me, the Ark of the Covenant, which symbolizes my presence. I called out to him, "Samuel." He got up without hesitation and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am." But Eli said, "I didn't call you." Oh. So he went back to bed. I called him again, "Samuel." He got up and he went to Eli and he said to him, "Here I am, you called me." But Eli answered, said, "I didn't call you, my son. Go and lay down." Scratching his head, he went back to bed. You must keep in mind, Samuel did not know me yet, and my voice had not been revealed to him. I called out to him a third time, and as per usual, he went to Eli and said, "Here I am." Finally, Eli understood that I, the God of Israel, was calling the boy. Eli instructed Samuel to go back and lay down. He said to him, If you hear the voice again, reply by saying, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.' So Samuel went, lay down in his place, and I came to Samuel again, and I stood by him this time, and I said, 'Samuel, Samuel.' And Samuel did just as Eli told him to do. He said, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" How could Eli go back to sleep after that episode? Was he not nervous that I chose to speak to the boy rather than to him? Did he sense that his fate hung in the balance? Or that he could no longer be trusted? After all, I did warn him about the behavior of his sons, and he did nothing about it. I'm sure he could sense that judgment was on the rise. Nevertheless, in Eli's disobedience, Samuel learned from him and knew that the ministry must go on. He was a bright young man. Hence, I felt that I could trust Samuel because he had the heart of a servant. Samuel was about 11 years old when I called him. He was respectful and reverenced the duties associated with temple life. As he served Eli every day and prepared the temple for the sacrifice, I was preparing him for my service. Every experience he went through with Eli formed his heart for service to me. He turned out to be Eli's apprentice and my servant that would influence the land of Israel. Samuel continued to grow in stature and favor, and I was with him and made everything he said come true. All Israel, from the north to the south, knew that Samuel had become my spokesman, a prophet to the people that they so desperately needed. Finally, my presence was back in Shiloh. Because I made myself known to Samuel. I hope you're beginning to see that my way is perfect and proves to be true. You know the saying, there's a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens. I placed Samuel exactly where he needed to be, at the right moment, at the right time of his life. Hannah, his mom, had no idea how established Samuel would be. His yes demeanor made him fit to be my voice in Israel. For when he spoke, believe me, the people listened. There are many in this congregation that have said yes to the Lord, and he blesses you for that choice. This message is for those who are unsure of where they stand. The Lord is speaking to this congregation through stories of the Old Testament. And here is what he's saying. He's saying, I want you to hear me. There is no need to question the journey that you're on. You are where you need to be. I have placed you in this moment and appointed you for service at this particular time of your life. Just like Samuel, your destiny has been mapped out. from the day you were born and is stamped with my seal of approval. Let me remind you, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Ethan, Dom, Damien, Megan, Alex, Max. You are the influencer of your day.
Amen.
You are a spokesperson to this nation. If that's too big for you, it's to your community. If that's too big for you, it's to your friends and your family. You must remember everything that was written in the past was written to teach you, so that through endurance and the encouragement of the scriptures, you would have hope and overflow with confidence in my promise. Every experience that you've gone through and that you're going to go through has formed your heart and will form your heart and mind. Every challenge, every victory, and every heartbreak, all that you've had to overcome has set you up for the position that I have made available to you. I'm calling you because you have a servant's heart. I know some of you are questioning your purpose in life. I don't want you to question my call in your life anymore. I need you to put that to rest. Your journey will be different. Everybody's journey will be different. And of course, very personal. You will experience pain and confusion coupled with blessings and victories, but you can be sure that all that is required for the task, I've equipped you with. Your assignment, if you choose to accept, is to listen when I speak, open your eyes to what I'm showing you, and because you've entrusted me with your heart and mind, my divine power will make you fit to be my voice and representative in this land that is so fearful. Surely, as I have planned, so it will be, and as I have purpose for you, so it will happen. Continue to perform your duties. Seek me through my word and by prayer, and I will reveal myself to you. Then go into this world and be the light. By doing this, your heart and mind will be continually transformed. Keep saying yes to me, Dom, and I will walk with you. As you draw near to me, Damien, I promise I will draw near to you. For when you speak my words, Megan, people will pay attention, and I will capture their hearts. They will notice a difference in you. Leave a God impression wherever you go.
Amen.
Most of all, continue to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." This life is a life of faith. I don't think Moses saw the magnitude. I don't think Solomon saw the magnitude. They couldn't have. They lived by faith. I told you about the hall of faith in Hebrews 11. In that hall of faith, you've got Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah. Sarah lived by faith. Sarah couldn't have a baby. And she didn't put a lot of faith in her husband to make that come to be. She put faith in the God of Israel. And she had a baby. And from there, we have our descendants. Moses lived by faith. Joseph lived by faith. Now picture when we get to the gates of heaven. Just use your imagination for a second. And you're walking into heaven, and you're going down the hall. And on the walls, you see a picture of Sarah. What was she known for? She lived by faith, and she glorified the Lord. There's a picture of Abraham. What was he known for? He lived by faith, and he glorified the Lord. You keep walking, and there's a picture of Joseph going down this, and all of a sudden, oh my goodness, there's a picture of my gran. What was she known for? She lived by faith, and she glorified the Lord. That makes me excited. This life is a life of faith. Our inabilities, our lack of confidence, our whatever, it means nothing to the Lord. Our purpose is to live by faith, to walk this life listening. And it doesn't take you much to figure out somebody that's in need. It doesn't take a lot to be God's hand extended, right? If you can operate where God has you, as small as Max and Alex are, in God's presence, in God's mind, like Alex can go to school, Max can go to school and see a need, and he, in his little way, can be God's hand extended. It doesn't take much to just open that door and make that first step. I just wanted to bring this message to you from God's perspective, because He has a plan and purpose for our lives. And you can be a part of that with a willing heart. You cannot be a part of that as well with denial and with not having a willing heart. But God is calling you young people to be the light in your community. He really is. You know, He's calling you, have a purpose on you. You were dedicated as a baby. There's a purpose for all of us. And I just wanted to present this from God's perspective so you can really see that there's nothing that we can say to the Lord that's going to change His mind about His destiny for us. There's just really nothing. The only way that you're not going to get there is because your disobedience and your inward focus on the Lord.